Hi, everyone. Life Happens is the podcast that helps you build mental fitness, brought to you by 87%. I am James Gwinnett, endurance athlete and the marketing director of 87%. And in this series, I speak to inspirational people to get their take on life's ups and downs, how they've overcome setbacks, and what it means to them to be mentally fit. This week, we are speaking to a military man, getting his insights on what it takes to reach the pinnacle of military service, the Marine Corps, no less. But we're also going to delve into the darker side of what a life in the military entails, specifically the horrors of war and the effects that it can have on the mind. Because my guest suffered from depression, anger, panic attacks, all as a result of PTSD. This left him homeless and on the brink of suicide, but he pulled himself back from these struggles and is now an award-winning author, entrepreneur, and a man on a mission to help other veterans who are suffering. This is going to be an incredible hour. I'm looking forward to getting into the mindset of Sgt Aaron Quinonez. Welcome to Life Happens.
All right. Hey, thanks, James. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about mental health. So thank you very much. So,
Aaron, the first question that we always ask our guests is, how are you?
So that's a great question. How are you doing? A lot of people, I think they just answer that without giving it too much thought. Just you give your standard canned answer of, oh, I'm doing fine. And so it's really good to take a moment to reflect on that. And for me today, actually, I'm a bit of what we call sad panda. And so it's just a term that we use. It's like just a heaviness that kind of sits on you, but it's not like overwhelming or like detrimental, but it's just like a little bit of sadness that just kind of hangs on you. You know, pandas are cute, right? But they're still really heavy animals. So we call it just sad panda, just a little bit, on the lighter depression side, I think. And a lot of that has to do with, I've just been traveling on the road for quite a bit. I've been doing a lot of speaking engagements. I had 3 different meetings yesterday, back to back, about some technology that we're looking at. And so, I think a lot of that just catches up with you. And if you're not paying attention to your mental health, it can get out of control. And so, there's some things I did last night to try and help myself, get through that. Yesterday was a little bit rougher. Today I'm doing much better. But yeah, that's a great question. So thank you for asking.
Can I ask what the things you did last night that helped that were?
Yeah. So the first thing I do is I have a small group of guys that I know and trust, and we talk to each other openly about mental health. And so if any of us are feeling out of sorts or a little depressed or maybe some anger or whatever that is, whatever that little bit of mental health bump in the road is, we always talk to each other about it. Not that the other people have to fix anything for us, but just to get it out in the open. Anything that is in the darkness, when you bring it to the light, the darkness has to flee. And so when we talk to other people and we share that experience with people that we know and trust, then it lightens that burden for us. Just to get it out and get it in front of other people helps tremendously to lessen the burden that you carry. A burden shared is a burden lightened. And so we all do that for each other. Now, a lot of times some people may put that out on social media, which is not great because you don't always get positive feedback from people. And so it can actually make that condition worse, or make that feeling of isolation, loneliness, depression. It can make it worse when people share it on social media and then they get a negative response, or maybe they didn't get the response that they were looking for. They got no response. And so creating a support network for yourself of friends that you know and trust, really important.
They say a battle plan never survives first contact, and I had sort of a line of questions that I wanted to put to you, and we're already going off on a tangent. I want to explore that before we come onto your background, because how do you, for someone who might be wanting to set up such a support network, how do you go about that? Because there's always, again, this stigma of mental health. And if I were to turn around to a friend and I say to them, I'd love to talk to you about my mental health, they'd probably, they might laugh at me. So how do you go about bringing that support network together?
That's a great question. I address that in the book that I wrote. I address that in the first chapter. I talk about these 3 mental health camps that most people find themselves in. And so you have the victim mentality, and on the far right, you have the denier camp. And in the middle, you have what I call the silent majority. Now, the 2 camps on the left and right, they're minority camps. There's not a lot of people in those. The majority of people are in the silent majority. And so to explain that a little bit, the victim mentality, and we all know people like this. Maybe you are this person. I know I've been this person before, where we're just a perpetual victim of our circumstances, where we take no personal responsibility for anything that's gone wrong in our life. We continue to get fired from our job because our boss just doesn't like us. Relationships end because they weren't the right person or they didn't do X, Y, and Z. And so we're stuck in this perpetual victim mentality. Now, that's a minority camp. And on the right, we have what's called the denier camp. Those are people who don't think that mental health is a real issue, that they just need to try harder or get over it, or that people struggling with mental health are weak and that they can't contribute to society. They're broken. They need to be locked away or just get over it. I see in the church a lot people say, oh, if you just prayed more, then you wouldn't have this problem. And so to those people, I always ask them, I said, well, do you say that to the guy in the wheelchair that, hey, brother, if you just prayed more, you'd be able to walk? Probably not. Right. And so that usually is a good little nose punch to them. To make them think like, oh, wow, maybe this is something different than what I thought it was. But see, the majority of us, we're in the middle. We're in what I call the silent majority. We're people who are struggling with mental health, but we're surviving. And a lot of times we're striving. We're CEOs, we're pastors, we're sports stars, we are performers, we are speakers, we are fathers, we are mothers, we are teachers, and we're struggling with mental health, but we haven't surrendered to it. We're still struggling. And so what happens is that if the silent majority stays silent, nothing changes. But if we can stand up and say, hey, I struggle with mental health, it changes the conversation for everybody. For the people on the left who are in the victim mentality, it makes them think, wow, if Aaron had these issues and he was able to overcome them, then maybe I can too. And it gives them hope that they can do better and be better. And for the denier camp on the right, what it does is it changes their perspective of what they think mental health is. Because when they look at somebody like me who owns and operates a very successful janitorial company, I have over 100 employees in the Puget Sound. I'm a published author. I'm the founder of an award-winning nonprofit. I was named Seattle's hometown hero. And they say, you struggle with mental health, with anxiety and depression. It changes what they think somebody with a mental health looks like. But the most important thing it does is when people like you and I, when we step out of being the silent majority and we start speaking about mental health, it changes the conversation for everybody. And that's how we break down that stigma. And so that's what I would encourage people to do, is to just get past that fear and just talk about it. And you'll find those people who in life are struggling for a support network, is you've got to raise that flag and say, hey, I struggle with mental health. Who else? And then you build your team, your support network with them.
There's all these crazy statistics of 1 in 4 of us is suffering with a mental health issue, yet only, I think it's 2 or 3% come forward. I had a fascinating conversation with another guest recently about having what he called courageous conversations, and I love that idea of moving from that that silent majority, whatever percentage of us it is. I love that idea of moving from surviving into a thriving mindset, and recognizing the difference between mental health and mental ill health, because there's a stigma about mental ill health, but we all have mental health. So important for us all to be having these conversations. I love your take on that. Thank you. Let's, if we kind of want to wind the clock back, go back to your childhood, because you endured quite a rough upbringing. I wonder if we could explore that. Where did you grow up? What were the circumstances before you found military service?
Yeah, so I grew up in Humboldt County in Northern California. And so Humboldt County is known for growing the best marijuana in the country. This was back in the 70s and 80s. Okay, so it was very illegal back then. And I lived on this mountain, which was very close to like a hippie commune where there were just dozens of other pot farmers out there. And that's what we did. So we were constantly running from the law. They were constantly, kind of coming after us. It reminds me of the old movies you watch of the moonshiners, that's people making moonshine in Kentucky. That's kind of what it was like for me with my parents and everybody else growing marijuana, with the police always trying to catch us. And the thing about growing up in that lifestyle is it comes with a lot of fringe benefits, like alcoholism, drug abuse, child abuse, domestic abuse, divorce, homelessness, like all of those things, because you're in society, but you're living like on the underbelly of society. So there's all these things that you grow up thinking are normal, like drinking and fighting. But when you get into real life, you realize that those things aren't acceptable. And so it was tough, and we ended up becoming homeless at one point because of my dad's addiction issues. And so that was the first time homeless, and it was really a struggle. They actually have done a Netflix documentary on the area that I lived in. It's called Murder Mountain. And so it's about the mountain range that's the next one over from where I grew up. But it was very, very similar to how I grew up, this documentary. And so if you look on Netflix, you can find it. It talks about the drug trade and the human trafficking that happens and the murder that happens in those areas. And that's right where I grew up.
So why the Navy specifically? How did that come about? And is it fair to say that in one way sort of saved you from going off the rails, given that background?
Yeah, and so in the Marines, I wanted to go the far other direction of everything that I had been with the drugs and the hippies and the free love lifestyle. Like I wanted to get as far away from that as I could. And so I joined the service. And what I realized was that my childhood actually really prepared me well for military service, because I was very adept at doing more with less and being able to endure hardship. And so when I got to boot camp and you're being yelled at and told what to do, and everything is very structured and you have very little creature comforts. For me, I grew up like that. So it was no culture shock. For the other guys that maybe came from the city, or a different upbringing, they really struggled with that. Being, wait, you mean I can only eat these 3 times? I can't have snacks, or I can't watch TV, or I can't use the telephone, or I can't do what I want, dress how I want. They really struggled with that. But for me, I really didn't, because I was used to enduring hardship, sleeping on the ground, being out in the field, being out in the woods. That's how I grew up. So for me, it wasn't a hard transition. When I went through my military schooling, I got recruited to go to a special forces unit called 1st Anglico. And Anglico is the Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company. And so what we do is we call in all the air support artillery for all branches of service. And we work with a lot of foreign military as well. I worked a lot with the Rock Marines and a lot with the Australians. And so we partner with them to give them our air capability. So they'll take a small team and attach us to one of those units, and we will help them by utilizing our aircraft to bring more firepower to the team.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, what about you? I mean, it was obviously you talked about the hardships of as part of training. What about the mental side of training, because you served in Iraq. Did the training prepare you for what was to come?
I think it did the best that they could, but nothing prepares you for combat except combat. And so it's funny because they say that you never know how you're going to act until that first bullet breaks the heat of the day. And it's true. You know, I served with guys and you'd think like, oh, this is a big, strong guy. And but as soon as bullets came down range, he crumbled. You know, but it's fine because that was his initial reaction. But because of the training, he's able to recover from that and get back in the fight. But you really never know how your body is going to react until that moment happens. And that's when the training takes over, is after that initial, moment of panic and fear. What do you do next? And so in the Marine Corps, we get a tremendous amount of training because we're the first to fight. And so we do a lot of live fire training. And when you look back at the training in the military, all of it conditions you to be ready for combat. Even when we're running, and the cadence that we sing when we're running, it's all about devaluing human life. So that way, when you do have to go on the battlefield and kill the enemy, you've already subconsciously devalued that life in your mind. And so it makes that easier to pull the trigger, because to shoot at another human and try to take their life, it's a very unnatural thing. It's not something that's natural. And when that happens, when you have to get to that point and engage in combat and actually have to kill other people, it changes you on a fundamental level. I know it did for me. My brain, it almost like when you hit the brakes on the freeway and you lock up and the car kind of skids sideways. That's kind of how my brain felt the first time that happened, because it was so unnatural. It was something that shouldn't be happening. And so your moral compass gets skewed. The memories in your brain are basically seared into your mind, and they're stored separately, differently than other memories in an instant. And you instantly start to look at life a little bit differently, with a different shade on it. But all of that happens so quick, and you've got to get back in the fight, and you've got to get back to the mission. And so you just basically data dump all of that stuff. And a lot of guys just keep it there. They put it in this box that we call the deal with it later box. And they just keep stuffing it full of all these experiences until it starts overflowing into their regular life.
And I suppose like Pandora's box, you want to keep it closed. As soon as you open it up, let's talk about the effects that all of that had on you. If military service was a blessing in terms of saving you from an unruly childhood, was it also a curse in terms of the effects that it had? Perhaps you could talk about the sort of the later stages of your service and sort of the way that, PTSD, the way that manifested itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And so at the time, I didn't understand it. I didn't understand mental health. I was having nightmares all the time. I was having anxiety. I was having panic attacks for no reason. I wasn't sleeping well. I was starting to have audio hallucinations where I would hear things that weren't really there. And I couldn't make sense of it. I thought I was going crazy. I'm like, okay, this is what happens right before you end up in the loony bin. And so I was really worried about that. I took that time and I went to the VA, which they were not really any help. So we have the Veterans Administration. It's a hospital just for soldiers, but they just really over medicated me. And I was one of the guys that slipped through the cracks of that system. And I ended up becoming homeless again. And I was living in my car for a bit. And to manage life, I was just drinking to be able to drown out those painful memories. And that worked for the short term, but it had long-term detrimental effects on my life, with my relationships, my job, with my health, physical health. And so in the short term, it worked, but in the long term, it was very detrimental. Mm-hmm. And so it was a long, hard path to come back from that, because I wasted many years living that lifestyle and not understanding how to get out of it. And so what I did is I started reading medical journals and research studies to figure out, how does the brain operate? My brain it's malfunctioning. And so how do I figure out where it's malfunctioning and fix it? And so I started reading medical journals and studies. And at the same time, I was studying the Bible. And I realized that there was these parallels, that what the Bible had been telling us for thousands of years was now being proved by science. And it was amazing to come to that realization and to see that there's a direct correlation with what Scripture says and what the research is telling us today. And so I started to create a little program just for myself, never thinking that I would ever help anybody else with it. It was just a way for me to maintain my own mental health. And that's what I ended up doing. And it worked. That was 13 years ago that I created that plan for myself. And in the last 13 years, I've grown. I started a janitorial company in 100 in the Northwest.
So, I mean, did you diagnose yourself in which case with PTSD, or were you discharged from the Marines on medical grounds? What was the sort of process, the time scale and sequence of events in those months and years?
Sure. So I got out in 2004 and I was discharged. I went from the battlefield to my front door in less than a week. And so there was no military mental health out processing or anything like that for me. And it only took a couple months of being home before I started having these mental health issues. And it took me probably 6 or 8 months to go to the VA, of just trying to struggle with it and figure it out. And 6 or 8 months of going to the VA, and then about a year of working with them and getting no results, actually feeling worse because of the medication, the over medication, that's how they were solving problems. It was just to over medicate you. And that's when I ended up homeless, because they diagnosed me with PTSD, but they didn't give me a disability rating. And so that's really important to understand, because you can be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, but not get a rating. And that means that they're not going to cover any of your treatment. And that's what was happening to me. I'd been diagnosed, but they didn't give me a rating. And so I had to pay out of pocket for all of the treatment that I was getting at the VA. Now, that has since changed in the last few years, but there's a lot of guys like me who ended up with these huge medical debt to the government. And the government is great at getting their money, because they'll just take it out of your tax return at the end of the year. And so that's what they did to me. That's how I ended up becoming homeless. And so I don't have a lot of love for the Veterans Administration, because it really did me a disservice, in my opinion.
It's a cruel twist of fate that you spent 8 years serving your country and then got ill as a result of it, and then they came back and took everything from you as a result. I mean, that's pretty brutal.
And the saddest part is that my story is not uncommon. It's very common. When you talk to the veterans who are living there out on the streets, they have very similar stories as mine, very similar experiences with their time after they come back from the service. And so I'm one of the lucky ones, I think, because I found a pathway out. And so how I did that, I actually, I got to a point where I remember it was the 4th of July, and I hadn't slept in a few days. I had a tremendous amount of anxiety. I was getting ready to become homeless again. I had gotten a job and was working, but I wasn't doing well, and I was going to be terminated, and all of these problems kind of just kept coming back because I wasn't managing mental health. And I remember I drove into this vacant parking lot, and I pulled my vehicle up to the side of the building. I kind of backed in, and I thought I would just end my life right there on the 4th of July, which is America's Independence Day.
Yep.
And I remember it was hot, that I could feel the heat coming through the windshield. And so I rolled down my window so I could get a breeze to come through. And when I did that, I could hear these kids playing on a playground not too far away. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to end my life, but I don't want these kids to have to, walk up on me. So I'm just going to wait until they leave, and then I'll end my life. The next thing I know, I woke up. I had fallen asleep in my car waiting for these kids to leave. And when I woke up, the suicidal ideations were gone. And so I put my pistol away and I just continued on with my day. A few days later, a friend called and said, "Hey, you should come with me to church." And I said, "I'm not interested. I'm not big on religion. No thanks." He's like, "Well, here's the address, and you should come." And I remember that Sunday I woke up and I think I was a little hungover, and I was like, what the heck? I'm going to go check this church thing out, And I drove down there, and I drove right back into that same parking lot that I almost ended my life in a few days before.
Wow.
And that is a very surreal feeling, my friend. It was like, wow, this is strange. I don't know what's going on here, but I need to find out. And so I went to the church, and I really paid attention to what the pastor was saying, because it was such a unique experience. And he was talking about feeling lost and alone and without hope. And I was like, this guy is reading my story right now. This is everything. And so I did the altar call, and I gave my life to the Lord, and I thought, okay, this is it. Like, everything's going to be better. I'm going to be healed. But that didn't happen. I still struggled with mental health. I still struggled with things, but I didn't give up. I knew that there was something there. So I kept going to church. I joined a small group. I learned how to read the Bible, how to study it. And that's when I started studying the Bible and reading these medical journals and figuring out, like, okay, the VA is not helping me. I've got to figure this out on my own. And so I did. I started reading medical journals and the Bible, and I created this process of healing through service, healing through serving others. And how I really lived that out was about 9 months later, I got invited to go to Mexico to build a home for a homeless family. And now I didn't want to do that. I did not want to do that. Why? Because that touched on my own fears and anxieties about homelessness. Like, I was like, I do not want to do that, because that's how our brain works, right? Like, we think about, we have a memory, and then your brain says, oh, well, let's pull up all the other memories that are related to this. And it wants to show you that. Your subconscious wants to bring those things to the conscious mind and show you. It thinks it's being helpful, but in those instances, it's not. And so when I would think about going and doing this build, it just brought up negative memories about being homeless as a child, being homeless as an adult. But I fought through that, and I went anyway. And when I went and I built that house for that homeless family, it was the first time that I felt any emotions in years. It was the first time, and I was like, oh, what is this feeling? I don't know what this feeling is. This is incredible, because I had been so numb for such a long time that it felt very strange to have these emotions come up, joy and happiness, and to cry, and not out of sadness, but out of joy. I mean, that was something I hadn't experienced in such a long time. And when I came back to the church, I was like, I need more of this. Like, whatever this is, I need more of it. I said, when's the next time we're going to Mexico? They said, well, we only do it one time a year. I was like, that's not good enough. Whatever this was, I need more of it. And so they helped me get connected with these other organizations like Youth with a Mission, Builders International, and do 4 or 5 trips a year, every single year. And I would journal a lot. I would read the Bible. I would read these medical journals, and then I would journal myself, my experiences. Like, when I would go, I would have so much anxiety getting on the plane, because I don't have a weapon. I've never been out of the country without having a full combat load and some air on station. So if things get crazy, I'm calling in fast movers, and I'm going to put steel on target and smoke some bodies. But that's not available to me now. And so super, super anxiety ridden. The guys that I'm going with are like older guys who are retired, who are not military. And I'm like, if something happens, I'm literally the only guy here who knows how to handle this. I might make it out of here, but I don't know about the rest of you. So I would create these contingency plans for whatever country I was in, and figure out, how I would best get out of the country if something went sideways. And it took me a long time in doing those journals, but I finally came up with this plan for myself to overcome this anxiety and these negative experiences by creating more positive ones. Because I found that we have a negative bias, right? So we all have a negative bias. So if you and I have a negative interaction, it's going to take 4 to 6 positive build relationship. And so that negative bias that we have, that works with the trauma that we've experienced. And so we have to build positive memories around that. So every time I would go to Mexico or Cambodia or Swaziland, and I would build a house for a homeless family, I was creating a positive memory around homelessness. And that helped me overcome that trauma. Now I can talk about homelessness and I don't feel that anxiety-ridden part of my soul take over. And so that's really important for people to know, is that you can't run from those things, because if all you do is avoid them and run from them, you put it in that deal with it later box, eventually it comes out and it can overwhelm you. You have to create positive memories around that negative experience in order to be able to overcome that. That's what I found. That's what my program is based off of. That's what my book is about, is teaching people the fundamentals of how does the brain operate? And when it's malfunctioning, how do we put things in place to get it back to operating properly?
And I mean, obviously what you're saying about positive memories of homelessness is incredibly important for turning that round. I am fascinated, however, by the negative aspects of it. It's particularly interesting. We're theming content around this show because the 10th of October is World Homeless Day. And I want to get an insight into what it's like. It must have been so incredibly tough. I'd love to get your steer on, how it challenged you mentally, how you found the motivation to build all of these positive memories that led to you turning the journey of turning your life around.
Yeah, absolutely. So homelessness as a kid, you don't really know how to process it. So I think I was 13 at the time. So your brain is still developing, it's malleable. And so I didn't really, I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't understand it on the level like I did when I was an adult. And so it just felt very uneasy. You felt very unsafe all the time. And you felt really embarrassed. There's a lot of shame that came with it, right? Like, I don't want my kids at the high school to know that I'm homeless. It's and everything is more difficult. Like, how do you cook food? How do you wash clothes? Right? All of that stuff becomes.
How do you cook food? How do you wash clothes?
Yeah, you just wash them in the river, right? You wash them in the river. You hang them on a line. You cook over an open fire, or you have a small propane tank that you cook with. You got to go do dishes in the river. So water is the most difficult thing to find and to use when you're homeless. So taking a shower is difficult, bathing is difficult. So water is when you're homeless, water is the most important thing. That's why you see a lot of homeless live along the river, right? Because there's an active water source there. And when you think about, like, in ancient times, the poorest of the people lived along the river because then they had easy access to water. And so you would see a lot of that. So we lived on the river when I was a kid. When I was an adult, I was still trying to work. And so I really just lived in my car, and I had a small tent because the car was kind of cramped. Washing clothes was difficult. I'd have to go to a laundromat to do that, which cost money. Showering was very difficult. Basic hygiene in the morning. A lot of people would go and get a gym membership, and that would help them with the hygiene. I would just use baby wipes. That's something I would use. Now they actually have these like moist towels that are much larger, they're like 18 inches that are used for that. But that's in the military, again, prepared me for that because there's not a lot of access to good hygiene when you're out in the field. So you learn to shave in your canteen cup and bathe with baby wipes or your canteen. And so I was used to that. Eating and food storage, you can't really have a lot of food storage. So it's basically you buy what you need for the day. and that's it. It's, for me, a lot of the homeless would group up because there is safety in numbers, but there's also a lot of abuse that can come with that, surrounding yourself with in the community. A lot of times people who are out there are heavily drug addicted, or, you know, they're criminal, they've lived the criminal lifestyle. And so it can be very dangerous to live out there in those groups. For me, I stayed away from the homeless encampments. I didn't want to be around those type of people, that type of environment. I always wanted to get out of it. So I didn't surround myself with it. And that's part of the problem. I do a lot of homeless outreach now. I work with a guy named Ken Hay, who works for Auburn, the city of Auburn, and he helps get the homeless off the street. And he says it's very easy. There's a lot of programs out there to get people off the street. Keeping them off the street is the difficult part, because the minute they have a setback, or the minute they have something that triggers their mental health, they go right back to what they know, which is the street, that group of people. And so one of the things that he and I have been working on is, how do we help these people who come off the street build better relationships with people who are healthy, who can be a support network for them. And so that's what we're working on right now. We're working with the church community to help the homeless, once they've gotten a home and now they're going through job training, to be that support system for them, to be that good positive influence. So that way, when they have a setback in life, they don't go back to the drugs, back to the alcohol. They don't go back to the environment that they're used to with the other homeless people that are out there on the street. And so that's what I see now. And so when it comes to homeless programs, they've come a long way, because there wasn't a whole lot out there when I was going through it, but things have changed quite a bit. And there's a lot of programs out there to help people. So there's resources. If people want to get out of homelessness, there are resources available. You have to utilize them. A lot of times what we see when we go out and we do canvassing for homeless is that they don't want to leave that lifestyle. They feel comfortable there because they can go out and panhandle. They can go out to these different churches and organizations and get the little things that they need to live comfortably in homelessness. And I think that right there is the most inhumane thing that we can do, is allow people to live comfortably in homelessness. And so there's a lot of times where we want to help people, but helping hurts, where we're working with people and we're giving them all of these resources, but there's no accountability for it. And then it becomes a detriment. And I saw that most recently in the Auburn Valley, where there was a church who was very well-meaning. It was going to be a cold winter, so they wanted to give out free clothing to the homeless. And so they could come there, anybody could come there, get clothes whenever they wanted, however much they wanted, no accountability. It sounded great, low barrier of entry, anybody could show up and get warm clothes. The problem that happened, because there was no accountability, is that the homeless would come, they would get clothes, and they knew they didn't have to take care of these clothes, because they could just throw them in the river and then go back and get more clothes, because there was no accountability. So it ended up costing about $2 million to clean up the river, and it destroyed about 40 miles of salmon habitat, because all of this trash and clothes littered the Puyallup River. And I fished down there, and so I saw it firsthand. It cost millions of dollars to clean this up. And that's a good example of when helping hurts. And so what they did is they created a much bigger problem when they were just trying to do the right thing. They had good intentions, but it turned out really bad because there was no accountability. So when it comes to homelessness, I argue with people all the time about this, because I've lived it, I've experienced it, I've seen it, and you have to 100% have accountability for any resources that you give to somebody out on the street. Otherwise, you're creating more of a problem than a solution.
So what advice would you give to someone, average person, who might want to do something to support the cause, the homeless, whether it's donating money to charity? We obviously have different charities on each side of the pond, or getting more more involved, what advice would you give?
I would say don't ever give money to the guy on the street panhandling, because you're not solving a problem. You're giving him enough money to go get drugs, alcohol, food. You just don't know. There's no accountability for that. And what that does is that teaches him that he can now just go out there and panhandle, and he doesn't have to become part of society. He can live outside of societal norms, and we're allowing that. We're actually encouraging that by giving that money out. And so I would always tell people, give to an organization, but give to one that's local in your own community. Now, there's these whole national plans and things like that. That's great. But if you really want to make an impact, start in your own city. Give there. Find out who is working with the homeless in your city and go out with them. Don't just give money, but go out with them. Any organization that is worth their salt is going to ask you to come out and do work with them so you can see it firsthand. And I highly encourage that. It's going to give you a new perspective. It's not just my opinion that you're hearing or your opinion that they're hearing. They're seeing it firsthand. So they're going to have a totally different experience. And give to that organization that's working in your own community. That way you can see the impact, and you can be part of the success story of your own town, in your own city, in your own area. Build that area first.
Thank you. That's fantastic. I love that idea of the local community. Similar question actually on suicide, if I may. What should you do if you're, again, what advice would you have to someone who might be struggling, or to someone who knows someone that they think is struggling? What advice would you give to sort of support someone going through a difficult period and maybe having those obviously terrible thoughts?
So it's a great question. There's really two answers. If you're the person who's struggling with mental health, don't be afraid to ask for help. Tell people, tell somebody, right? And so I like to talk about mental trauma or suicidal ideations and trauma. It's like a physical wound. And so it's hard for people to understand what mental illness is, but if we can compare it to a physical wound, let's say. So if I had a broken arm and I didn't tell anybody, I just wrapped it up and I went about my day, and somebody went to give me a pat on the back, I would have an overreaction because they touched that wound. I would have an overreaction, and they wouldn't understand why. Why did that happen? Because I didn't tell anybody. And if people say, hey, can you help me move this Saturday? I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. Well, why not? We're friends. They don't know because I didn't tell them I have a broken arm, that I can't perform at the same level that I used to be able to perform at. And I don't get it fixed. And so over time, what's going to happen is that arm's not going to work properly. It's not going to heal properly. It's always going to cause me pain. And if I don't take care of it, it can get infected. And if that infection gets into my blood, it's called septic. And when it becomes septic, as soon as that blood, that septic reaches my heart, it'll kill me. A mental wound is the exact same thing. When we have a mental health trauma or an issue regarding mental health and we don't tell people, then they can touch that part and we have an overreaction now. And then people don't understand why. Like, why did Aaron have that reaction? And so, because I didn't tell them. And if I don't go to see a professional, go to see a counselor, that gets worse. And it starts to become anxiety. It starts to become depression. And if it's left untreated, or if people self-medicate with drugs or alcohol, then that can become septic too, in the form of suicidal ideations. And then when that gets to our heart, it kills us. And so it's a lot easier for people to notice that. So how do you take care of a physical wound? Well, if I had a broken arm, I would tell people like, hey, I got a broken arm. Can you take me to the hospital? Like, this thing is hurting. I would see a professional. They would reset the bone. They would give me some pain medication. They would give me a treatment plan. And I would tell my friends and family like, hey, broken arm, dude, I'm not going to be able to go kayaking with you. I'm not going to be able to do these things. And they're going to give me space and grace to heal. Well, it's the same thing with the mental wound. If we say, hey, I'm struggling with suicidal ideations right now, I need some help, they're going to get you to a professional. They're going to give you a treatment plan. You're going to come back. They may give you medication in the short term. And I only advocate for medication in short term. I don't advocate for long-term medication. But they're going to give you a treatment plan, medication. Then you're going to go back to your friends and family and say, hey, this is the issue. This is the treatment plan. And they're going to give you space and grace to be able to heal as well. And then you'll be able to overcome those things. And you may not be able to ever fully overcome them. You may always have, a limp, walk with a limp because that arm or leg is broken. It didn't heal 100% right. But it's not going to be painful to the touch. You may have a scar, which people notice, but you'll be able to talk about it without it being painful. And it's the same thing with mental health. You'll be able to talk about those issues without it causing that internal pain and suffering that you had felt before. You got to clean out that wound, heal properly. And you may not be able to do the things that you used to be able to do. I used to love going to concerts and being right in the middle of it, with the bass just booming. I used to love that. I cannot do that anymore. If I go into that and the bass is booming, my adrenaline kicks up, and then, my amygdala hijacks me and I go into a panic attack. And I'm like, okay, I can't do that anymore, but I can still go enjoy music. I can go to smaller venues. I can go to outdoor venues where I'm farther away from that bass booming and still enjoy things. I just have to do them differently than I did before. And so people out there who are struggling with mental health and thinking like, oh, I'm never going to get back to normal. There is no normal. Okay. You create a new normal, and you may not be able to do things that you did before, but you just may have to do them differently. Think about people who are in the Paralympics, these guys who are people who are top of their game and then they got injured or they lost a limb. And so they can't perform like they used to, but they're still out there chasing their dream and living their life in sports in the Paralympics, right? They're still operating in that sport. They're just doing it differently now.
And they're performing better than we could, possibly imagine.
Absolutely. And they're getting great enjoyment out of it. They're able to live very fulfilled lives, doing things differently than they did before. And so that's what I want to encourage people is don't focus on the things that you can't do, focus on what you can do and do it the best that you can.
I really like that analogy of the sort of the physical injury, and that reaction to whether it be, being patted on the back or sepsis. I think it's very important, as you say, just to bring it out into the open, make it obvious. As you say, if you break your arm, you put it in a sling, don't you? You don't just sort of go about your day as if nothing's happened. Same with mental illness, and I love that phrase, space and grace. That's you should trademark that. That's nice. Let's touch on the book, and then we've got a series of questions that we ask all our guests at the end. Can you tell us about the book, summarize its ideals, some of the research that's gone into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book really just came out of all the journals that I had written over the years to create the program for myself. And so I found healing through serving other people by going out and doing these missions trips all over the world, building churches, schools, orphanages, digging Lithuania, Nepal, Kenya, all over the world, and helping other people. It really brought me a lot of mental resiliency, and I was able to create positive memories. And what I learned was that I couldn't just go on these missions, because what would happen is I would go and I would do these great things, and I would come home and I would kind of just burn in, right? And there'd be this ebb and flow in my mental health. And I realized that this is not a one and done. It has to become a lifestyle. And so when I would go home, I started serving in my own community with the homeless population. I would serve with the youth that were in my church. And so I was continually serving my community, and that kept my mental health a lot more stable and actually increased it more than anything else that I had ever done. And I learned there's a few different studies. The first one that really kind of kicked off this line of studies is called the Mother Teresa effect, where they took a group of students and they had them watch Mother Teresa do good deeds in Calcutta on a video. And they took these oral swabs and they tested them before, during, and after they watched the video. And they would see what chemicals were being released in the brain. And so at the end of the study, they saw that the individuals who watched the video, that 90 minutes, had an increased level of their mental awareness, their mental fitness was increased just by watching Mother Teresa do good deeds.
Wow.
And so that was kind of the first one that in a long line of other research that they did. They did another one that was really cool. It was very simple. It was homework help. And so they wanted to see, like, okay, who gets more benefit, mental health benefit, the person receiving help or the person giving it? And so they took these two groups of students, and same thing, they tested their saliva, and they saw that the individuals who received homework help, they got their benefit through the help. There was very little mental health benefit to them. But the people who were giving the help had a huge mental health gain by helping others. And so, the Bible tells us this. It says, he who wants to be first must be last, and the last will be first. And then Peter asked, well, who's the greatest among us? He said, the greatest among you must become your servant. And that's Jesus telling us that if we want to be great in the world, we have to serve other people. We have to help other people. God designed us that way, that it's part of our social construct, that when we help other people, we receive mental health benefit. And so that's why you have so many do-gooders out there. That's why altruism is such a big part of our society, because people who do that, whether they realize it or not, they're receiving mental health benefit. They're getting more mental resiliency by helping other people. And so there's all kinds of studies that came out all over the world about this subject, and they're very easy to find.
That's wonderful. I'll bring things on to the set questions that we ask all of our guests. And I'm going to start with, is there anything, and it might be the support group that you talked about earlier, but maybe there's something different. Is there anything that is an absolute non-negotiable that you do regularly to improve your mindset or your mood?
Yeah, absolutely. I do a daily devotional with my Bible. So I read my Bible every day and I journal it. And so I probably have thousands of these days racked up, but I only count my consecutive days. And so in the top right-hand corner, I'll put like D01 for day 1. If I'm on day 25, it's D25. And if I miss a day, then I go back to D01. And so it's just a way to keep myself accountable, because before I was like, oh yeah, I do my Bible study every day. But once I started tracking it, I was like, oh man, I really don't do it every day. So I really focused on doing it every day. And right now I'm on day 336 consecutive days. And so for me, that's my non-negotiable. That's the one thing that I do every single day. Typically before I do anything else, is I do my daily devotional. That helps me get my mind focused. And I talk to other Christians who don't do that. And I say, well, if you have a job, right? He said, yeah. I said, okay, so if the CEO had a morning meeting every day, would you be at it? Well, yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, why would you go to it? Well, because I would want to know what's going on in the company. I would need to know what tasks needed to be completed. So that's why I would go. I said, all right, well, your daily devotional, that's your morning meeting with God. And so I have found that to be true in my life, where I'll read through my daily devotional and then a scenario will come up in my life and I'll reflect back on that and be like, okay, I know how to handle this now because I've spent that morning studying the word and understanding what God has for me for that day.
There's something incredibly powerful in a routine, whether it's meditation or I go running every day, whether it's talking to God, Bible studies, that and again another guest was talking about those small habits where you can just, it might be 3 minutes and actually that relates to a program that we have within the 87% app that and it's scientifically proven to help your mental fitness, just spending 3 minutes a day focusing on how you feel, that self-awareness, etc. So thank you for that. That's brilliant. What makes you good at what you do?
I think because I have an inside-out approach. I see things from the point of view of somebody who has struggled with suicidal ideations and struggles with mental health. And so I think I'm a lot more relatable to people than, say, somebody with a medical degree who has been a research psychologist for 2 decades, right? They're not very relatable to the average person. They may have the book knowledge, but they don't have the street smarts to understand the finer points. And so a lot of times, even though they may have the right answers, they get dismissed because they can't speak to the average person. And so I've experienced that when I've worked with these doctors here out of North Carolina, which is where I'm at right now, with this technology piece that we're working on. And the book that I wrote, I create this whole program, a step-by-step program based on the research that they've done for mental health. But the response that I get from psychologists and from social workers is that, Aaron, you didn't tell me anything I didn't already know, but you put it in a way that was easy to understand. And you created a system out of all these different research studies that were done. You created a system that people can follow. And so that's what what makes me good at it, is because I've struggled with mental health, and these things that I'm telling people to do, I've done myself with good results. And if I've had mixed results, then I tell you, like, hey, this may work for you, it may not. There's mixed results on this. And so I'm very transparent with people about my own mental health struggles, which makes me relatable. And I've used these techniques, and so have hundreds of other veterans have used these techniques as well to overcome mental health struggles. And so I think that's what makes me good, is having that firsthand knowledge and not a secondary experience, as where some of the clinical psychologists may only have a secondary experience.
So it's a bit like the difference between an astronaut and an astronomer. If you were to sit down, if you were to invite someone over for dinner who has studied, well, if you were to invite someone over for dinner, would you choose someone who has studied space for 20 years or someone who has been to space? It's always going to be the guy who's been to space, isn't it? Every time.
That's a great analogy.
There you go. You can have that one. What would you say to a young Aaron?
I'd say don't quit. Don't give up. You know, that's what I tell everybody. I said, where you are right now is not where you're always going to be. You know, move forward. Even if it's just a baby step, move forward. Find one thing that you can accomplish every day. I'm big on task lists. And so even if the only thing that you accomplished that day was making your bed, hey, you accomplished something. You've got a win in the win column. But if you don't track that, if you just kind of float through life and take things as they come, you're never going to get where you're going, because you have no direction. So if you create a list and you have a task list, and it could be 100 things long, and if you get one done, great, you got one done. And if just making the list, that's one thing, right? You've done one thing. And so I would say, just keep moving. I tell people, like, what's the secret to your success? They ask me, and I say, well, because I'm too stupid to quit.
That's a lovely mentality.
You know, I don't give up. I'll fail. I'm gonna keep going, and that's really it. I figured I don't have to be better than anybody else. I just have to outlast them, and so far it's worked.
Keep at it. Anything, idea, place, book, people, doesn't matter, that you have taken inspiration from recently?
You know, I became part of the John Maxwell team, and John Maxwell is international speaker, trainer, and coach. And so he is really big on bringing value to other people and being able to help other people succeed. And that's something that I really tried to grow my company, and I couldn't get past about 45 employees. I couldn't grow past that like $1.2 million mark. And no matter how hard I tried. And what I learned was I needed to stop trying to grow my company and start growing my people. And once I shifted my focus to growing people instead of my company, everything changed. And I grew 40% in 2 years, and I do over $4.5 million in business. Well, it's because I shifted my focus. If I build my people, they will build my company. And so I look at that the same way with my nonprofit work. I don't have to build this huge program and this huge nonprofit. I just have to build the people who are in front of me. And if I can help them become better, faster, and stronger, they'll take that message with them. When people ask them like, hey, how did you do this? They're gonna like, oh, this book and this program, it helped me. Maybe it'll help you.
Wonderful. And lastly, if people want to get in touch, how do they do that?
Yeah, so you can find the book, Healing Through Service. It's online, it's on Amazon, it's on Kindle. You can go to healingthroughservice.com. And so it's not just a book, we have a whole program. You can read just the book if you want, but there's a book and journal. So that way we call it Healing Through Service. It's the Warrior's Guidebook to Overcoming Trauma. And when you go through it, there's a companion journal you can get, or just use a journal, any journal on your own. When you get done with it, you've created your own guidebook to overcome your specific trauma, because we have you take a negative experience and work through that whole negative experience, talking about how the brain operates, until we create this positive interaction around that negative experience. And then we tell you can replicate that with all the other things that you've experienced in your life. And if you do that on the website, there's the book, the journal, and there's a video series which will lead you through that small group study together as a team. And so that's where you're going to get that's going to be the force multiplier, is when you have friends that can hold you accountable to these goals that you set for yourself. It's going to help you be a lot more successful. So the website, Healing Through Service. If anybody ever wants to book me to come out and speak on mental health, you can go to sergeantq.com. That's, it's sergeantq.net, sgtq.net. And that'll get you to my professional speaking page. So I do a lot of training on mental health. And I talk a lot about my own experience and show people how to overcome these things. They're not a death sentence. You know, dealing with mental health does not mean that your life is over. It means that you may have to do things differently.
I said it was going to be an incredible hour. It has been an incredible hour. We have, got so much to summarize. Moving past the idea of being the silent majority, empowerment, the act of service, and the positive impact that can have on our mental health, the importance of the local community, the relation of mental health to sort of physical ailments and how we should perceive things. I love your phrase, you're giving people the space and the grace. Aaron, it really has been fantastic to talk to you. I've loved your insights. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'd love to come back if you ever need me again. I'd love to come back and share some more experiences.
I would love that. Thank you again.